Nicholas Kristof is a big deal. He has won 2 Pulitzer Prizes, one with his incredible wife, Cheryl. They have their work in being witnesses and reporting back from the Tiananmen Square massacre changed how we think about China. And his reporting on Darfur has changed hearts and minds. He has been to over 150 countries, narrowly escaping every kind of pestilence, as far as I can tell, remains intact, or is a hologram and is here tonight. But his works like Half the Sky or Tightrope are so beautiful, you will love them. But tonight we're going to talk about his memoir, Chasing Hope, which is so deeply connected to his understanding of purpose, and I know it will resonate with yours. So let's put our hands together for Nicholas Kristof.
Thank you.
It's so ridiculous and good to see you here in this context.
It's great to be here in this context.
It feels too fun because you're the one that typically has all the questions, and I will have so many pointy ones. You've written such a tender book about how to find your purpose in the world, and I wondered if we could start by talking about your dad, who seemed just like what a witness to courage, and also such a powerful example of how one person's life can have so many shifting kinds of identities with something as seemingly durable as like, what country are you from? So I wondered if we could start there and what his life was like before coming to the United States.
Sure. And when Kate talks about my dad, not being sure what country he was from, if you asked my dad with his thick accent where he was from, he would tend to say Romania. Meanwhile, if you asked his sister where she was from, she would say, oh, I'm Armenian. And if you asked his brother, he would say, I'm Polish. And when his sister would call up, they would speak together in Romanian. When my uncle would call up, they'd speak together in Polish. He grew up in an area called Northern Bukovina, in what is now Ukraine, was then Romania, was Austria-Hungary when he was born, in an Armenian family. And then the family spied on the Nazis during World War II. They got caught. They fled in every which direction. Some family members were killed by the Nazis. Some were killed by the communists, by the Soviet communists. And my dad ended up in a concentration camp in Yugoslavia. And his life was saved by a French diplomat who kind of broke the rules to save my dad's life. And this diplomat was never promoted to ambassador. But because of him, I exist. Mm-hmm. And then my dad was able to get to France. He wanted to come to the US, and 2 French journalists helped make an introduction to the US ambassador when he could not get a visa to get him that American visa. And that was also, not quite maybe appropriate for a journalist to do, to help somebody get a visa. But again, I wouldn't exist if it weren't for that. And so one reason why I give my editors gray hairs is because I'm trying to pay it forward. Yeah. And if I break the rules, it's because I exist, only because these other people broke the rules before me. Yeah.
That dual, when you hear him tell the story, do you find yourself identifying as much with his role as like a refugee and an exile, or as much as the advocate that like bent, if not slightly broke, ways to make a path for him?
Well, so it's funny because, when I was a kid, I was very conscious of having a dad who had a very strong accent. I grew up in this small farm town in Oregon where everybody else, knew how to fix carburetors and play baseball. And, we had one disastrous game of baseball where my dad tried to get a runner out by throwing the ball at the runner. And then my dad couldn't understand. He said it's so much harder to hit a runner than it is to hit second baseman. He should get credit. And, I'm just mortified. So when I was a kid, I was very self-conscious about having this dad who was very different. Then it was really, I guess, in college and beyond that I became incredibly appreciative of the risks that he had taken, how he had managed to rebuild his life over and over and start over in America. He arrived not speaking any English. He arrived in New York and took the train to Oregon. And in New York, he bought a Sunday New York Times as his learning material to learn English. And read through the paper over months and months and months with a dictionary. And I just came to so admire that as an example. And I think it also, taught me to empathize with people who are struggling, who are left out, who are marginalized, who are refugees or otherwise struggling. And to use what, my little platform at the New York Times or as an author to try to shine a light to help people. And if that involves occasionally breaking rules, don't tell.
There's such a funny determination about, like, every story about him seems to have like a zig and a zag in it.
Yeah.
Like the story of you be like, okay, we're farmers now. We're farmers. We have a really good idea for what we should farm. It turns out.
The Kristofs were not the most successful farmers. We had this beautiful farm in the right where the Willamette Valley goes into the coastal range. My parents got a book to discover the best animal to raise, and this book recommended sheep because they said they graze more closely than cattle. So then they got a book from the library about what breed of sheep to get. And this book written in New Zealand recommended Corriedale sheep. So we got Corriedale sheep. Well, it turned out that, we entertained all the neighbors because they pointed out that, look, there are too many coyotes around. You'll feed all the coyotes. It'll be a coyote buffet. And second, that Corriedales, they have great wool, but they don't. But basically, you raise sheep in America for meat, not for wool. But undeterred, we then got a book about how to defend your sheep from coyotes. And it recommended this breed of dog called a kuvas, which is a guard dog, a Hungarian guard dog. So we scoured the country and we got a kuvas. And Kate, the first thing our expensive kuvas did was to kill one of our lambs. And then we engaged in a cover-up. You may recall that Kristi Noem was kind of bragging about killing her dog. No, on the Kristof farm, we do things differently. We engage in cover-ups. And so we protected our dog. And the dead lamb wasn't as much of a problem. The bigger problem was one that the dog had mauled. And there's this antiseptic called Blue Coat that you put on the wounds. And so we had this blue lamb, and the blue lingered for months. And it was kind of a telltale thing. But I should, just in defense of the dog, she never touched another lamb, another sheep. She protected them from coyotes for the rest of her life, once killed a coyote in the sheep shed. And ever since then, we've had other kuvases. We now have Connie. And the kuvases, in the end, they did protect the sheep. They did work out. So I do recommend going to your library and checking out books to run your farms, but it just may take a while to get everything just right.
I like how in the end of the story, everyone became a vegan. Yeah. That was nice. It's a very benevolent end.
Well, it sort of inherited because in the last few years, Cheryl and I decided to support the community to plant grapes and cider apples to make wine and cider. And so we protected our vines and apples from all the deer in the area by putting this impregnable deer fence around the trees and the vines, only to discover that we had fenced some deer inside our impregnable deer fence with nothing to eat but vines or apples.
You just made a deer zoo.
The deer are laughing at us. They're mocking us.
I guess it's, I mean, I really love your family stories because there's such a hilarious, like, whack-a-mole quality to, like, and then we tried this. Having recently discovered information about this, we tried. I wonder what you got. Your mom is from a Quaker background, is that right?
There were elements of a Quaker background.
Quaker
yeah.
adjacent, yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder what qualities you got from your mom.
I certainly deeply admired that faith. We went to Quaker meetings occasionally, and kids in meetings are actually empowered to periodically stand up and say what they think, which is kind of nice. So it was a tradition that that I really admired.
I do remember my son recently. Right now we're at a Presbyterian church, and he was like, Mom, why do you keep taking me to this place where they keep saying we'll hear from God, but everyone just keeps talking? It's like, that's actually that's a really good argument. I don't blame you. It's too many creeds. They just, yeah. Just in case anyone's taking notes to pass on. My family always had mottos, like really hilariously specific but generalizing mottos, like don't let the turkeys get you down, or one we just had like don't get crumbs on the baby, which I just feel like was more just like a life lesson after we had my youngest sister. But we were like, you know the family motto, and I was like, how is this relevant anymore? But I wonder if your family had a motto. What would your motto be?
We certainly didn't have, we didn't particularly have a motto, at least not in English that I was aware of. My dad he was a polyglot, and he was always, so he may well have had a motto in Serbian or something. But I think that, there was this undercurrent, which I certainly absorbed, of both hope. I think that he thought that hope had, kept him alive, that better days would come, and that it's not something passive, but that hope is a muscle, and that we build it and develop it, and thereby are more likely to achieve that outcome. More likely, not necessarily.
Yeah. You found a partner in Cheryl that shares your curiosity and courage, and I wondered if we could hear about the role that China had in shaping your young married life, and in particular in your role in reporting the Tiananmen Square massacre.
So China just shaped us in so many ways. It started, and it still very much affects my journalism. We arrived in China in the fall of 1988 as the New York Times correspondents there. The first lesson came when we moved into the official New York Times bureau chief apartment, and we knew it was bugged, partly because one of our Chinese friends worked part-time translating conversations in our building. But we didn't know quite where the bugs were. And then somebody pointed out this little recess in the wall covered with a screen and said, that's where the bugs are. So I thought, I'm going to get to the bottom of this. I got a ladder, pried off the screen. There's all this electronic gadgetry there. Cheryl and I are peeping in. We recognize the Chinese characters. I've just been studying Chinese. I'm so proud of myself. I've nailed it, because this big gadget says, the Chinese characters on it read, electronic sound carrying device. We just arrived in Beijing. We figured out the bugs. And then Cheryl and I were very well prepared for this moment, because we'd read a lot of spy novels. And so we decided that we were going to use this as our private disinformation channel to Chinese state security. We had nailed it. And then just at that moment, a friend arrived at the front door, and we discovered what an electronic sound carrying device is in Chinese. It's a doorbell buzzer. And that was just very useful to arrive in this place and feel like you understand everything. You've got it all figured out, because that is the moment you truly need to worry and that you're overstepping. and everything is always more complicated than it seems. And that's true in China in 1988. It's true of America in 2024. It's true of a lesson in humility for any reporter is a lesson of humility for anybody anywhere, that anytime we're a little too confident, too bold in our assessments, just beware. So that was a useful lesson. I mean, one harder lesson was just slightly more than we just last month celebrated the 35th anniversary. On June 4th, 1989, I was on Tiananmen Square at the end of the Tiananmen Square democracy movement in the crowd of unarmed protesters when the People's Liberation Army arrived and opened fire on us. And that was the massacre that ended the democracy movement. And you never forget seeing a modern army turn weapons of war on an unarmed crowd and just massacre people. And I felt I think it affected me partly, it goes back to the humility, I guess, that I had been kind of condescending. I felt badly because I'd been condescending to a lot of the less educated protesters, the peasants from the countryside, the workers. And I said, I wrote several times that, they say they're for democracy, but they can't really articulate what kind of democracy they want, what institutions they want, what guardrails. And that was all true. But that night, when I was cowering as they were opening fire on us, the heroes of the day were these rickshaw drivers, uneducated peasants of the countryside who would drive up toward the soldiers whenever there was a lull in the firing, pick up bodies of kids who'd been killed or injured, and put them on the backs of the rickshaws, and then pedal them to the hospitals. And there was a bus driver on one of the roads leading to Tiananmen Square, and it was a two-lane road, the only one going in. The troops were arriving from that direction to massacre more protesters. And this bus driver saw the truckloads of soldiers coming. He knew what they were intending. He quickly drove his bus to block across the road, to block it. And he turned the engine off and stepped down with the keys in his hand. It was dark. It was the evening of June 3rd. And the officer got out of the lead truck and ordered him, move the bus. And the bus driver, this salt of the earth worker, he said, no. And the officer pointed his sidearm at the bus driver and said, move the bus. And the bus driver took the keys and he hurled them into the grassy verge where there was high grass in the dark. Somebody like that bus driver, true, couldn't have defined democracy. He might not have been able to define institutions that he wanted, but he was willing to die for it. And in this country, as we've seen, I think we in this country don't always appreciate the democracy and the institutions that we've inherited. And I think we could learn a lot from the courage and conviction of those Chinese protesters who, maybe because they didn't enjoy it, knew how valuable it was.
It's a wild and terrible thing to see courage up close, I imagine. You've seen so much of it, and so much, your capacity to hear and to report and to simultaneously have like an absorptive quality, but also to be able to reflect it back. I wonder did you ever get used to the feeling of taking in that pain, telling the truth, and then having to do it again?
So, in some sense, you seek it out because you are outraged when you see that. When you see soldiers massacre unarmed protesters at Tiananmen Square, or in Darfur when you see the Janjaweed militia massacre people in a genocide because of the tribe they belong to, or when you see in Cambodia traffickers kidnap young girls and lock them in brothels and auction them off to be raped, you're furious. And I fight back, journalists fight back, we fight back with our laptops and our cameras. But to fight back effectively, those are our tools to fight back, we have to get there. And so we have to go and bear witness. And then we hope that we can do that without getting in trouble ourselves, without getting other people in trouble, without getting our interpreter and driver shot. But if we can get there and get that story, then the only reason we do that is this hope that then it matters. And that if we convey that, people will spill their coffee when they read my column, and then will, write their member of Congress, or these days email them, and that somehow it will add up. And sometimes it does, and it's thrilling, and sometimes it doesn't, and it just breaks your heart.
Yeah. There's like it's such a strange exchange between like the work of witness and then the economy of like empathy. Because, I mean, the great philosopher of mass death, Stalin, is quoted as saying, give us...
Well, that one death is a tragedy, a million deaths is a statistic. But
that's right.
But, it's not, I mean, I think there's this, the first time people meet me, they often think I'm going to be this, dour, grim, pessimist.
That is the man we met tonight.
The Eeyore of journalists.
That's right.
But, I mean, the truth is that you see, I mean, these things that I've seen, I just wish I could unsee. The Darfur genocide, maybe in particular, because that was civilians, that was kids. But you also see just the courage that people are capable of. In this country, we're not tested to the same degree because we don't have warlords going through our streets. When people are tested, it is amazing what we are capable of. And so I managed to come back sometimes just awed by the courage of humans, the decency of humans. I was in a village in Pakistan where I met this incredible woman I came to know well, Mukhtar Mai, and Mukhtar had been sentenced by her village council to be gang raped because of something that her younger brother supposedly had done. And in fact, he probably hadn't done it. But then the village council carried out the order. They gang raped Mukhtar. And the expectation was that she was then going to kill herself out of shame. Instead, Mukhtar prosecuted her attackers. She sent them to prison. And then she used compensation money for the rape to start the first school in her village because she believed that education was the best way to chip away at the misogyny and cruelty that had led her to be victimized. And then she enrolled the children of her attackers in her school. And, when you're in that village, yes, you see the evil that people are capable of, but you also see just what an amazing species we are, and how, when tested, we are also capable of this incredible strength and resilience and courage and just plain goodness. And that puts a spring in my step. That is why I am not a journalistic Eeyore.
I love watching you pick out little details, and even just if you just watch this man walk around, he's like, "Oh, thank you so much. And where are you from? It sounds like your mom would have." I mean, it's just it's such a wonderful and detailed way of knowing people, of figuring out what inspires, what tells the story of their life. I also wonder if it's given you unique perspective in how much we're capable of, I guess, co-feeling with other people. Because one thing that I find really common about a lot of the professions that I meet through Everything Happens is that they have these really porous jobs where they meet, there's this exchange of humanity that goes on. But then also we're also simultaneously trying to figure out, like, how much do I pour out, and then how much can it change in the world? You've experienced both a shocking lack of empathy over wildly important stories like Darfur. Like, I wonder if it makes you, this amount of granular attention makes you feel like everybody is as capable as empathy as you are?
So, yeah, I mean, well, there's been some, there's actually been some good brain research on this, and it turns out they put people under these brain scans as they help others or get money, and it turns out that most human beings, actually, the pleasure centers of their brains light up more when they help somebody than when they get something. But there are some egotists around who actually, their pleasure centers don't really light up when they help somebody else. And they light up when they get, not when they give. So there's, you know, there's clearly some variance. But I mean, you know, I do think that we are more empathetic than we tend to appreciate, and that one of our failures as journalists is that we aren't always great at the kind of storytelling that will connect people to foreign tragedies, and that people often want to help, but they don't quite know how, and they're, you know, then they get a call from some charity that mentions, you know, children in need or something, and they just don't know how to help effectively. Yeah. And so I think that we can do a better job addressing that, and that when, you know, when people have the opportunity, they do want to help, they do the right thing. We just sometimes have to be a better storytellers at it.
In the effort to make people care about Darfur, you had like structural obstacles you had to constantly chip away at to force people to look clear-eyed at what you were screaming.
Well, so the biggest challenge in the case of Darfur was simply to get the story. And, you know, that, I mean, the Sudanese government was not big on giving visas to reporters who would go report on its genocide. And so sometimes that meant then sneaking in, hiring a vehicle in neighboring Chad, and just hiring a car and just driving illegally into Sudan. And sometimes we found other creative ways. My most successful moment was when Kofi Annan was Secretary General of the UN. He was making a 2-hour trip to Darfur for kind of basically a photo op, and he agreed to take me along on the plane. And as we were coming down for the 2-hour visit, I said, by the way, I went back and saw him. I said, I just want you to know that I may miss the plane out. And I don't want people to be worried if I miss the plane out. It's okay, you can go. And he said, just be careful. And so sure enough, 2 hours later, I was in the back of the crowd at the airport, saw the UN plane take off, and I felt so exultant because I've been trying so hard to get into the heart of the genocide, and now finally I'm there and able to report, and Sudanese authorities don't know I'm there. They can't follow me, they can't tail me. And so, but then I realized that there were checkpoints all over manned by these people busy committing genocide. And I wasn't quite sure how I would ever get through the checkpoints until I saw these UN people with their English language UN passes. They would just show their passes and be waved through. And I realized these soldiers at the checkpoints, they probably can't read Arabic, let alone English. So I pulled out my United Airlines Mileage Plus card and got to the first checkpoint. It is amazing the respect that people, even committing genocide, have for United Airlines. You know? And, but then you have to, I mean, one of the most difficult, wrenching questions was about how to write about things without getting people in trouble. There was Sudan really had a policy of mass rape. It was a policy of rape. And it was a way of breaking down societies, discrediting village elders and tribal leaders. But you had to have people talk about it and tell their stories. But if they did, they could get in terrible trouble. Yeah. And how how do you get informed consent from somebody
Yeah.
when they don't know, she doesn't know what the New York Times is, what the internet is. I remember one woman, I was saying, why do you say it's okay to tell your story? And she said she'd been gang raped by eight Janjaweed, 8 of these people, and brutally beaten. And she said, this is the only way I have to fight back and tell my story.
Yeah.
I should have understood that.
Yeah.
And protected her, and I was able to go back 2 years later to that same spot, and she was okay. But
Yeah.
the responsibility you feel for other people's lives is just such a burden.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Witness does this really strange thing to both parties, doesn't it?
I mean, they're not passive. They're they're agents. You have to treat them that way.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Somehow giving them the respect that they are in this impossible situation, but they are making choices, and they're not these two-dimensional, victims. They are fully complicated people, and you try to help them and figure out, how you do that without breaking journalistic rules. And I think that the most troubling ethical dilemma that Cheryl and I ever faced was in China, when there was a young man who was arrested because he had helped us cover the Tiananmen democracy movement. And then he escaped from prison, and he came to Beijing and asked us for help fleeing China. What do you do?
Yeah.
The pretty basic rule of being a foreign correspondent, that you don't help an escaped felon flee the country. On the other hand, he's a 19-year-old guy who'd already been in prison because he'd helped New York Times readers. If we didn't help him, at some point he was going to get caught. Who knows what would have happened to him then? And it was also complicated a little bit because I'd never heard of anybody escaping from a Chinese prison before.
Yeah.
And I just, I wondered, how real is this? Could this be an entrapment effort? Could this be a setup to imprison us and get us, close the New York Times bureau? And I agonized over this. And Cheryl, I must say, had a truer moral compass than I did. And she said, we just have to help him. And we did. And he was able to get, with our help, to Hong Kong. And then we flew to Hong Kong, and were able to get him to the US. He's now an American. It's probably nothing I've done that was so unprofessional. But few things that I've done that I'm prouder of.
Father Greg Boyle, who's like everybody's favorite Jesuit.
Absolutely.
So you kind of have to have one, and he's like not a bad choice. Likes to say that unhope is lethal. And I wondered, your like fundamental tiggeriness, where you have bounce, the likes of which, like on your spare time, when you should be resting, you're like hiking or doing other horrible things. I wondered if, as we go into this next year, as people already pre-fatigued by feeling a lack of agency, a frustration, a despair, are things that our small efforts don't matter. But now seems like a lovely time to absorb a little bit of nickness in this.
So it's true. I think young people in particular, they look around, they say, I'll never be able to afford a house. Democracy is under threat. Climate change may ruin our planet. And, those are all real.
Yeah.
And the challenges around us are very real. But we've always faced immense challenges in this country and abroad. And I think that our brains sometimes don't fully acknowledge how much progress there has also been, what we've overcome. Cheryl is a Chinese American. Our marriage, a interracial marriage, was not allowed in every state when I was a young kid. When you ask in polls whether global poverty what has happened with global poverty over the last 20 years, 90% of Americans say it has stayed the same or gotten worse. In fact, we are lucky that we have lived in the most thrilling time in the history of humanity when there's been an explosion in human well-being. When I was born, 1/5 of all kids worldwide died by the age of 5. Now, when I graduated from college, 11% did. Now we're down to just over 3%. Every day, another 300,000 people move out of extreme poverty. Every day.
Wow.
When we were kids, a majority of humans had always been illiterate. Now we're pushing 90% adult literacy. That's transformative, especially because that increment is largely women. And when women are literate, they can earn money, they can hold jobs, they have influence in the household, they can raise their kids more effectively. It has this revolutionary impact. And so, yes, those challenges around us are all real, but we are equipped with toolboxes to help address these. And, people sometimes I think feel overwhelmed because they figure they can't solve problems. Well, when my dad was sponsored by a family in Portland, Oregon in 1952, that didn't solve the global refugee problem.
Yeah.
Didn't make a dent in the global refugee problem. It's pretty transformative for the Kristofs.
Yeah.
Any one of us has the capacity to make a difference. And it can be in our community, tutoring a kid, or supporting a shelter, or it can be half a world away. There's the girls' education is cause, I believe there's a group called CAMFED that educates girls. And I mean, that any of us can afford to do that at some level in ways that don't solve the global problem, but are completely transformative for some people somewhere.
Yeah.
That's the power we have. It's a superpower.
Yes. Nick, being around you is really annoying because
So much for hope.
I can tell. I can already think of like a couple more small steps that I can feel empowered to be a part of. And it also makes me want to change like some of my like knee-jerk fatalism into some mild to moderate, we're not going to say optimism, but forward thinking. And I just think we all feel really lucky that you were here with us tonight having this gorgeous conversation. Can we just thank you?
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.